General Alan Wright stood at the window of his office aboard the diplomatic space station. The stars shone brightly against the darkness. Below him, the blue-green planet Nexus Prime, capital of the Galactic Empire, rotated slowly. He sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. 20 years of service as Earth's ambassador to the Empire had aged him. His once dark hair was now mostly gray. But his eyes remained sharp and alert, missing nothing. Those eyes had helped him navigate the complex politics of the Empire for 2 decades. The door slid open with a soft hiss. His secretary, a young man named Peter Clark, entered with a data tablet. "The Imperial Council has responded to our request, sir," Peter said. "They've denied the mining rights for the Centauri system again." Wright nodded, unsurprised. "And what reason did they give this time?" "Environmental concerns, sir. They claim human mining operations are too destructive." Wright almost laughed. The Empire had stripped entire planets of resources with their massive harvesting ships. Their sudden concern for the environment was clearly an excuse. "Send a message to Earth. Tell Admiral Mason that we'll need to discuss alternative options," Wright said. After Peter left, Wright returned to the window. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 30 years ago. They were newcomers compared to species that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. Yet humans had expanded quickly, established colonies on dozens of worlds, and built a respectable fleet. Too quickly, according to some in the Empire. Wright had heard the whispers in the Imperial Court. Grand Vizier Krell, especially, spoke openly about the human problem. Krell belonged to the Draconians, a reptilian species known for their long memories and longer grudges. Wright's communicator buzzed. It was Lisa Garcia, his chief of security. "General, we've detected unusual movement of Imperial warships near the station," she reported. 3 dreadnoughts have taken position within weapons range." Wright frowned. "Have they made any aggressive moves?" "No, sir. But it's not standard procedure for fleet exercises. Keep monitoring them. I'll speak with Imperial Command." Wright sat at his desk and composed a formal inquiry to Imperial Fleet Headquarters. As he worked, he noticed a small notification on his screen. The station's secure communication channel with Earth had gone offline. That was strange. Those channels were maintained by multiple redundant systems. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. When it slid open, Wright was surprised to see Captain Ben Foster of the station's security detail, along with 4 armed guards. "Is something wrong, Captain?" Wright asked. Foster's face was grim. "General Alan Wright, by order of Emperor Zax Thrall, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the Galactic Empire." Wright stood slowly. "This is absurd." "On what grounds?" "Treason, espionage, and plotting armed insurrection," Foster said, his voice flat. "Please come with us without resistance." Wright's mind raced. This was no misunderstanding. It was a calculated move. "I demand to speak with my government." "All communications with Earth have been temporarily suspended," Foster said, "for security reasons." Wright nodded to himself. Of course they had. This was a carefully planned operation. As the guards approached, Lieutenant Samantha Powell burst into the office. "General, Imperial troops are boarding the station. They've already taken control of the lower levels." Foster drew his weapon. "Stand down, Lieutenant." Powell looked at Wright, awaiting orders. He gave her a slight nod. "Do as he says, Lieutenant, and make sure Earth knows what's happening here." Powell reluctantly stepped aside as the guards placed restraints on Wright's wrists. As they led him from his office, Wright saw Imperial soldiers in the corridor. They were fully armed and moving with purpose. This was no simple arrest. It was the beginning of something much larger. Through the window at the end of the hall, Wright could see more Imperial warships arriving. The Empire was making its move against humanity, and he was just the first target. In his quarters, a message waited to be sent. Wright had prepared it weeks ago, sensing the growing tensions. It contained one word: Watchman. If that message reached Earth, Admiral Mason would understand. The contingency plans would begin. Wright only hoped Lieutenant Powell would find it in time. Lieutenant Samantha Powell moved quietly through the air ducts of the diplomatic station. Her heart pounded in her chest. 3 hours had passed since General Wright's arrest, and Imperial soldiers now controlled every corridor. She reached a junction and paused to check her small digital map. The General's private quarters were 2 sections ahead. If Wright had left any message or evidence, it would be there. The station's emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the vent grates. Powell could hear Imperial soldiers below, their heavy boots echoing as they searched rooms. "All human personnel are to be detained for questioning," a harsh voice ordered. "The Emperor wants no messages reaching Earth until the trial is announced." Powell frowned. Trial. They were already planning a trial. She needed to move faster. When she reached the section above Wright's quarters, she peered through the grate. 2 Imperial guards stood inside, methodically searching through the General's belongings. "Nothing here," one said, tossing aside a book. "Just personal items." "Keep looking," the other replied. "Intelligence says he kept secret communications." Powell waited patiently. After 20 minutes, a message came through on the guard's communicators. "All units report to the main hangar. Imperial Prosecutor Dexon has arrived and requests full security detail." The guards looked at each other. "We're not done here," one said. "It doesn't matter. If the prosecutor is here, they already have what they need against the human. Let's go." After they left, Powell carefully removed the vent cover and dropped silently into the room. She had been Wright's aide for 3 years and knew his habits well. If he had hidden something, she would find it. The General's desk had been ransacked, drawers pulled out and contents scattered. His computer was missing, likely taken as evidence. Powell ran her fingers along the underside of the desk and found nothing. She checked the bookshelf next. Wright kept actual paper books, a rarity in the age of digital texts. He had often said that some things were too important to trust to networks that could be hacked. Powell pulled out each book, flipping through the pages. In an old copy of The Art of War, she found a small data chip taped to the inside back cover. She quickly pocketed it. A noise in the corridor made her freeze. Voices approached, then passed by. Powell released her breath slowly. She continued searching and found a hidden panel in the floor beneath Wright's bed. Inside was a sealed package with a handwritten note. "For SP, if watching the Watchmen." Powell recognized the reference to their emergency protocol. She opened the package. Inside was another data chip, larger than the first, and a small device she recognized as a specialized transmitter that could send encrypted messages through tachyon bursts, impossible to trace or block. Powell took everything and was about to return to the vent when the door slid open. An Imperial technician stood there, eyes widening at the sight of her. Intruder in the ambassador's quarters. He shouted into his communicator before Powell could reach him. She knocked him unconscious with a quick blow, but the damage was done. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. Powell climbed back into the vent and replaced the cover. She could hear guards running in the corridors below. The station would be locked down within minutes. She needed to reach a transmission point. Meanwhile, on the Imperial capital planet below, General Wright sat in a holding cell. The door opened, and a tall, reptilian figure entered, Grand Vizier Krell. "General Wright," Krell said, his scaled face expressionless. "I trust your accommodations are adequate." Wright did not respond. He simply watched the Vizier with steady eyes. "Tomorrow, you will be formally charged with planning an insurrection against the Empire," Krell continued. "We have extensive evidence of your treachery." "Manufactured evidence," Wright replied calmly. Krell's mouth formed what might have been a smile. "It hardly matters. The trial will proceed quickly, and justice will be served." "The Empire's version of justice," Wright said. "Indeed." Krell moved closer. "Your execution will send a clear message to Earth. Humans must learn their place in the galactic order." As Krell left, Wright closed his eyes. He hoped Powell had found his message. Earth needed to be warned. This was just the beginning. The imperial palace shimmered in the morning light. Its tall spires reached toward the sky, a symbol of the empire's power across thousands of worlds. On this day, crowds gathered in the massive public square, drawn by news of the human general's trial. Inside the palace's Hall of Justice, General Alan Wright stood before the imperial court. 7 judges sat on high benches, looking down at him. Their faces showed no emotion. In the front row of observers sat Grand Vizier Krell, his scaled hands folded neatly in his lap. General Alan Wright of Earth, the chief judge said, "You have been charged with conspiracy against the Galactic Empire, planning armed rebellion and espionage. How do you respond?" Wright held his head high. "I am innocent of all charges. I have served as Earth's ambassador for 20 years, always working for peace." The chief judge nodded to the prosecutor. "Present the evidence." A large screen displayed messages, supposedly written by Wright, discussing plans for human ships to attack Imperial outposts. Next came testimony from witnesses who claimed Wright had recruited them for a secret human army. Wright watched with growing anger. The evidence was clearly manufactured. The writing style was not his. The supposed meetings had occurred when he was elsewhere, but his objections were quickly silenced. "The court will hear final statements," the chief judge announced after just 2 hours. The trial was moving at an unusually fast pace. Wright stepped forward. "This trial is a sham. The evidence is false. I have always sought peace between humans and the Empire. I ask only that you allow Earth's representatives to present evidence in my defense." The chief judge looked to his colleagues, who shook their heads slightly. Due to the serious nature of the charges and the risk of human interference, outside testimony will not be permitted. This court has seen sufficient evidence of guilt. The judges conferred briefly. The chief judge spoke again. "General Alan Wright, this court finds you guilty of all charges. The sentence is death, to be carried out tomorrow at dawn." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even by imperial standards, such a quick execution was unusual. Wright stood perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. Guards led him back to his cell. Once alone, Wright sat on the hard bench and closed his eyes. He had expected this outcome, but had hoped for more time. On the other side of the city, Lieutenant Samantha Powell huddled in a small room in the alien district. She had escaped the diplomatic station by hiding in a supply ship. Now she worked desperately to decode the data chips she had found in Wright's quarters. The first chip contained records of communications between Grand Vizier Krell and others in the Imperial government. They discussed the human problem and plans to contain Earth's influence. The second chip was more shocking. It held fabricated evidence against Wright, created weeks before his arrest. Powell's hand shook as she connected the special transmitter. She needed to send this information to Earth immediately. As she prepared the message, her small view screen showed breaking news. Wright had been sentenced to death, scheduled for the next morning. "No," she whispered. "There's no time." On Earth, Admiral John Mason stood in the command center of the North American Defense Headquarters. The room was filled with officers staring at screens, all showing the same image: General Wright standing before the Imperial Court. "They can't do this," a young officer said. "It violates all diplomatic protocols." Mason's face was grim. "Send another protest to the Emperor. Demand a stay of execution until our representatives can arrive." An officer approached with a message. "Sir, all our communications are being blocked. We can't reach the Imperial capital." Mason slammed his fist on the console. "Launch our fastest diplomatic vessel. We have less than 16 hours. As dawn approached on Nexus Prime, Wright was led from his cell. 4 guards escorted him through silent corridors to the execution chamber. He walked steadily, back straight, eyes forward. In the chamber waited Grand Vizier Krell and several Imperial officials. A recording device hovered nearby. "The execution will be broadcast throughout Imperial space," Krell said. "Do you have any final words, General?" Wright looked directly into the recording device, knowing his words might reach Earth. "Remember what we stand for. he said clearly. The execution of General Alan Wright played on every screen in the United Earth Defense Council chamber. The room fell silent as they watched the general's final moments. His last words, "Remember what we stand for," hung in the air long after the screens went dark. President Elizabeth Carter stood at the head of the long table. Her face was pale, but her voice remained steady. "Admiral Mason, your assessment." Admiral John Mason rose from his seat. He was a tall man with short gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen many battles. "Madam President, this was not justice. It was murder, plain and simple." Around the table sat 12 council members representing Earth's major regions. Some wept quietly. Others looked angry. All appeared shaken. "The Empire claims General Wright was planning a rebellion," said Councillor Richard Hale from the European Union. "Could there be any truth to this?" Mason shook his head. "Absolutely not. Wright was our most dedicated advocate for peaceful relations with the Empire." The door to the chamber opened suddenly. A security officer entered, followed by a disheveled woman in a torn uniform. "Lieutenant Samantha Powell requests an immediate audience," the officer announced. Powell stepped forward. Dark circles under her eyes showed her exhaustion, but her gaze was intense. "I was General Wright's aide. I escaped from the diplomatic station with evidence." For the next 20 minutes, Powell presented what she had found: the fabricated evidence against Wright and records of the conspiracy led by Grand Vizier Krell. "They planned this for months," she said. "The Empire fears our growth. They executed Wright as the first step in a larger plan to contain humanity." The council members looked at each other in growing horror as Powell played a recording of Krell speaking to the Imperial Inner Circle. "The humans expand too quickly," Krell's voice said. "They adapt and innovate at an alarming rate. If left unchecked, they will threaten Imperial authority within a generation. Wright's execution will send a clear message, but further measures will be necessary." President Carter's hands tightened into fists. "Further measures?" Powell nodded grimly. "The second phase includes military strikes against our outer colonies. They plan to force us back to our solar system and establish tight controls on our technology and expansion." The council erupted in angry voices. Carter raised her hand for silence. "What are our options?" she asked Mason. The admiral stood again. "Diplomatically, we could appeal to other species within the Empire who might sympathize with our situation." "And if that fails?" asked Councillor Maria Rodriguez from South America. "Then we have only one option left," Mason replied. "We fight." Rodriguez laughed bitterly. "Fight the Empire. They have thousands of worlds, millions of ships. We have barely reached beyond our own solar system. We may be outnumbered," Mason acknowledged, but Wright anticipated this possibility. He turned to Powell. "Lieutenant, did you find the Watchman protocol in Wright's quarters?" Powell produced the second data chip. "Yes, sir." Mason inserted the chip into the council room's computer system. A detailed military assessment appeared on the screens. Wright had secretly been preparing contingency plans for years. "General Wright knew the Empire might someday turn against us," Mason explained. "He identified their vulnerabilities, their supply lines, their command structure weaknesses." The council studied the information in silence. Finally, President Carter spoke. "I never wanted this. None of us did. But they have given us no choice." She stood straighter, her decision made. "Admiral Mason, activate the Watchman protocol. Councilors, return to your regions and begin preparations." "Madam President," Mason said carefully, "I need to be clear about what you're ordering." Carter looked at each person around the table. They nodded one by one. She took a deep breath. "By the authority vested in me as President of United Earth, and with the unanimous consent of this council, I hereby declare that a state of war exists between Earth and the Galactic Empire." The words seemed to echo in the silent chamber. After 20 years of peace, humanity was going to war. The news of Earth's declaration of war spread quickly across the Empire. On many worlds, it was met with laughter. Humans, with their handful of colonies and small fleet, declaring war on the mighty Galactic Empire. It seemed like madness. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Zack's thrall watched the human announcement with mild amusement. "They are either very brave or very foolish," he said to Grand Vizier Krell. "They are desperate," Krell replied. "They know we plan to restrict their expansion. This is merely a gesture before they surrender." The Emperor nodded, already bored with the subject. "Send the Third Fleet to their colonies. Show enough force that they will quickly see reason." On Earth, a very different scene unfolded. What had appeared dormant suddenly came alive. Hidden shipyards beneath the oceans revealed massive construction projects that had been underway for years. Mountain bases opened to show stockpiles of advanced weapons. Orbital platforms that had seemed like civilian research stations transformed into military installations. Admiral Mason stood in the main control room of the Luna Command Base, watching as status reports came in from across the solar system. Lieutenant Powell worked beside him, coordinating the flow of information. "Wright built all this in secret?" Powell asked in amazement. Mason nodded. "Not just Wright. Every human general and admiral for the past 15 years contributed to the Watchman Protocol. We always hoped we would never need it." A young officer approached with a tablet. "Sir, all outer colonies report ready status. Civilian evacuations are complete." "Good," Mason said. "What about Project Sunstorm?" "The scientists say it's ready, sir, but they warn that once deployed, there's no going back." Mason's face grew more serious. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." In shipyards across Earth's solar system, vessels that had been disguised as cargo haulers and mining ships were being fitted with hidden weapon systems. Retired military personnel returned to service, bringing with them decades of experience. President Carter toured a facility in the Rocky Mountains where new combat suits were being prepared. Each suit enhanced the strength and speed of its wearer and included advanced camouflage technology. "How many do we have?" she asked the lead engineer, a woman named Susan Miller. 10,000 ready now, with another 40,000 in production," Miller replied. "They can't match Imperial heavy armor, but they're faster and more adaptable." Carter nodded. "Adaptability is what will save us." In orbit around Mars, the first strike team prepared for departure. Commander Steve Rogers briefed his soldiers, all veterans of Earth's Special Forces. "The Empire expects us to defend, to hide behind our walls and wait for their massive fleets," he told them. "They don't expect us to strike first. They certainly don't expect us to hit their supply lines." The soldiers nodded. Their faces showed determination rather than fear. "We launch in 6 hours," Rogers continued. "Our target is the Imperial Fuel Depot at Alpha Centauri. It's lightly defended because they think it's out of our reach." A soldier raised her hand. "Sir, even if we succeed, won't the Empire just crush us with their main fleets?" Rogers smiled slightly. "That's what they would do, gather their big ships and smash us head-on. But we're not fighting their way. We're fighting our way." Back on Earth, Admiral Mason received a communication from the Arcturus colony, one of humanity's farthest outposts. The Imperial Third Fleet had arrived and demanded immediate surrender. "Tell them to follow the protocol," Mason ordered. "Full evacuation, then activation of the defense grid." Powell looked concerned. "Sir, the Arcturus defense grid can't stop an Imperial fleet." "It's not meant to stop them," Mason replied, "just to delay them and make them pay a price." He turned to face the large strategic display, showing human territory and the approaching Imperial forces. "The Empire thinks this war will be over quickly," he said quietly. "They're wrong. It's just beginning." Commander Steve Rogers and his team moved silently through the asteroid field near the Imperial Fuel Depot at Alpha Centauri. Their ships were small and painted with a special coating that absorbed sensor scans. To Imperial detection systems, they looked like nothing more than space debris. Rogers checked his tactical display. 20 ships, each carrying 15 soldiers. 300 humans against the 2,000 Imperial troops guarding the depot. All teams in position, reported his second-in-command, Linda Hayes. Rogers nodded. Begin Phase 1. Across the asteroid field, small devices activated, sending out signals that mimicked the engine signatures of large cargo ships. Imperial patrol vessels immediately moved to investigate, drawn away from the depot. Phase 2, Rogers ordered. 5 of his ships broke away, heading for the communication relay station that connected the depot to the Imperial network. If they could take it intact, they would gain valuable intelligence and temporarily cut off the depot from calling for help. Rogers led the remaining ships toward the main facility. The massive fuel tanks held enough energy to power the Imperial Third Fleet for months. Without this depot, that fleet would need to return to the core worlds for resupply. When they were 200 meters from the outer hull, Rogers gave the final order. Phase 3. All teams go. The human soldiers exited their ships, using small propulsion packs to guide themselves to the depot's hull. They carried specialized cutting tools that sliced through the metal without triggering alarms. Inside, Rogers split his team into 3 groups. Hayes led one group to the control center. Another team headed for the power core. Rogers took his team to the main storage area. An Imperial guard spotted them in a corridor. Before he could sound an alarm, Hayes shot him with a tranquilizer dart. They had strict orders to minimize casualties. This wasn't about revenge, it was about strategy. Meanwhile, on the Imperial capital world, Emperor Zack's thrall received troubling reports. The Third Fleet had reached the human colony at Arcturus, only to find it evacuated. The defense grid had activated, destroying 3 Imperial ships before being overwhelmed. They knew we were coming, the Emperor said, puzzled. How? Grand Vizier Krell looked uncomfortable. It seems General Wright's contingency plans were more extensive than we realized. The Emperor's communication device chimed. What is it now? He demanded. Your Majesty, said an anxious voice, we've lost contact with the Alpha Centauri fuel depot. At the depot, Rogers and his team worked quickly. They placed small devices on each fuel tank, then retreated to the control center where Hayes had secured the Imperial staff. All teams report, Rogers called. Power core secure, came the first response. Communication relay captured intact, said another. We've downloaded their communication logs and security codes. Rogers smiled grimly. Begin data transfer to Earth. Lieutenant Hayes, prepare the prisoners for evacuation. An Imperial officer looked at Rogers with hate in his eyes. You can't possibly think you'll succeed against the Empire. We have thousands of worlds, millions of ships. We don't need to match your numbers, Rogers replied calmly. We just need to make this war too costly for you to continue. He activated his communicator. All personnel return to ships. We leave in 15 minutes. As the human soldiers retreated with their prisoners and captured data, Rogers stayed behind to activate the devices they had placed. They weren't bombs. They were precision tools designed to rupture the fuel tanks in a controlled way. The fuel wouldn't explode, but it would vent into space, unusable. Back on his ship, Rogers watched as the fuel depot's tanks began to leak their contents into the void. Trillions of credits worth of fuel, gone. Similar operations were happening across Imperial space. Small human teams striking critical infrastructure and disappearing before massive Imperial fleets could respond. On Earth, Admiral Mason received reports of the successful missions. Inform the President that Phase 1 is complete, he told Powell. The Empire's supply lines are compromised. Powell nodded. And Phase 2? Mason's expression hardened. Now we show them what humans are truly capable of when pushed too far. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Zack's thrall's rage grew as more reports arrived. Fuel depots, communication relays, supply warehouses, all hit by human strike teams. The mighty Imperial war machine was suddenly struggling to move. Find them, he shouted at his generals. Find them and crush them. But the humans were already gone, vanished back into the darkness of space, planning their next strike. Lieutenant Samantha Powell stared at her screen in disbelief. After weeks of decoding Imperial records captured during the raids, she had found something terrible. "Admiral Mason needs to see this now," she told her team. She grabbed the data drive and ran through the corridors of Earth Defense Headquarters. Mason was in a strategy meeting when Powell burst in. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but this can't wait." Mason nodded, and Powell connected her drive to the main display. The room fell silent as images and documents appeared on the screen. "This is from the Imperial Central Archives," Powell explained. "The Empire has been systematically eliminating species they consider threats for over 500 years. The display showed records of other civilizations that had risen quickly, shown great potential, and then mysteriously declined or disappeared. In each case, the pattern was the same. Diplomatic incidents were manufactured, leaders were removed, and the species was slowly contained and controlled. "We're not the first," Powell said quietly. "Just the latest." Mason studied the information. "How many species?" 27 that we can confirm," Powell replied. "Some were completely wiped out. Others were restricted to their home planets, their technology limited, their growth stunted." A colonel spoke up. "Why would they do this?" "Fear," Mason said simply. "The Empire is old, set in its ways. Species like humans, adaptable, innovative, quick to change, threaten their stability." Powell nodded. "And there's more. Some of these species still exist, living under Imperial control. The Etherians, the Nexu, the Dorvan, all once had thriving civilizations." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Could they be allies?" "If we can reach them," Powell said. "Many have been subjected to centuries of propaganda. They may not trust us." Mason turned to his communications officer. "Contact President Carter immediately. Then prepare a secure channel to the Etherian homeworld." Days later, Mason and Powell stood before a view screen. On it appeared a tall, slender being with pale blue skin and large eyes. This was Elder Kiraran of the Etherians. "Why should we trust humans?" the Elder asked. "The Empire tells us you are violent and dangerous." "The Empire told you the same about yourselves once," Powell replied, "before they reduced your fleet and restricted your colonies." The Elder's eyes widened. "How do you know this?" Powell sent the historical records they had discovered. There was a long pause as the Elder reviewed them. "We have lived under Imperial rule for 3 centuries," Kiraran finally said. "Many of us have forgotten our history, but some remember." "We're not asking you to fight for us," Mason said. "But the Empire has controlled you through fear and lies. We offer an alliance of equals." Similar conversations happened with other species. Some refused to help, too afraid of Imperial retaliation. But others, seeing proof of the Empire's systematic suppression, agreed to provide secret support. On the Imperial capital, Emperor Zax Thrall grew increasingly angry as reports of human successes continued. Even worse, unusual activity had been detected on several subjugated worlds. "The humans are contacting our servant species," Grand Vizier Krell reported. "They are spreading dangerous ideas. Increase our military presence on those worlds," the Emperor ordered, "and double the bounty for information leading to human strike teams." In an unexpected move, the Emperor called Krell to his private chambers. "This situation is becoming unacceptable," Zax Thrall said coldly. "You assured me the humans would be quickly defeated." Krell bowed low. "Your Majesty, we underestimated their preparations," General Wright had. "I tire of hearing about the dead human general," the Emperor interrupted. "Fix this problem, Vizier, or you will join him." On a small Etherian trading vessel near the edge of Imperial space, Powell met with representatives from 6 different species. Each had suffered under Imperial rule. Each had agreed to join what they now called the Alliance of Free Worlds. "For centuries, we believed we were alone," said the Dorvan representative, a reptilian being with golden scales. "The Empire kept us isolated, told us we were inferior." That ends now, Powell said. Together, we can share technologies, resources, and information. United, we have a chance against the Empire. As the meeting concluded, Powell sent a coded message to Earth. Phase 3 complete. Alliance formed. Resistance spreading. 6 months had passed since Earth declared war on the Galactic Empire. What had started as a seemingly hopeless fight had transformed into a growing rebellion across dozens of worlds. The Alliance of Free Worlds now included 17 formerly subjugated species, all united under a common cause. Admiral John Mason stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship, the HSS Wright, named after the executed general whose death had started this conflict. Through the view screen, he could see hundreds of ships gathered, human vessels alongside the distinctive designs of the Etherians, Dorvans, and other allies. All fleet commanders report ready, sir, said Lieutenant Powell, now promoted to captain for her critical role in forming the alliance. Mason nodded. Begin the jump sequence. Next stop, Nexus Prime. This was it, the final push toward the Imperial capital. After months of strategic strikes and growing rebellion, the Alliance had weakened the Empire's grip on its outer territories. Now they would strike at its heart. On Nexus Prime, panic spread through the Imperial Palace. Defense systems activated as sensors detected the approaching fleet. Emperor Zack's thrall rushed to the war room, his face dark with rage. How did they get past our outer defenses? He demanded. The Dorvan sector fleet. Defected, Your Majesty, a general reported nervously. They provided access codes to bypass our warning systems. The Emperor turned to Grand Vizier Krell. You said the servant species were contained. Krell's scales had lost their healthy shine. The human influence spread faster than we anticipated. They shared our secrets, united our enemies. Prepare my personal ship, the Emperor ordered, and activate the Sundering Protocol. An aide gasped. But, Your Majesty, the Sundering would destroy half the planet's population. Better half than to let it fall to rebels, the Emperor snapped. As the Alliance fleet entered orbit around Nexus Prime, Mason received an urgent message from their intelligence division. Sir, we're detecting energy buildup at the Imperial Palace, reported an officer. Based on the patterns, they're activating some kind of super weapon. Can we disrupt it? Mason asked. Captain Powell stepped forward. Our Etherian allies identified it as the Sundering, a last resort weapon. We need to disable it from the ground. Prepare the landing teams, Mason ordered, and alert Commander Rogers. His team will lead the assault on the Weapon Control Center. On the surface, the battle raged across the gleaming capital city. Imperial forces fought desperately, but they faced enemies they had long dismissed as inferior. Human soldiers fought alongside Etherian technicians, Dorvan warriors, and resistance fighters from a dozen worlds. Commander Steve Rogers led his team through underground tunnels beneath the palace, guided by maps provided by Imperial defectors. They encountered heavy resistance but pushed forward relentlessly. The weapon control room is ahead, Rogers told his team. We have 5 minutes before activation. They burst into the room, quickly overwhelming the Imperial technicians. Rogers approached the main console, where a countdown was already running. Can you disable it? He asked an Etherian engineer. Yes, but it requires Imperial authorization, the engineer replied. At that moment, the door slid open. Grand Vizier Krell stood there, surrounded by elite guards. You're too late, Krell said. The Sundering cannot be stopped without the Emperor's codes. Rogers raised his weapon, but Krell made a surprising gesture. He ordered his guards to stand down. The Emperor has fled, Krell said bitterly. He abandoned Nexus Prime to save himself. Krell stepped forward and placed his hand on the console. For centuries, I believed in the Empire's superiority. I helped suppress other species, including yours. But the Emperor's willingness to sacrifice our homeworld. He entered a code, and the countdown stopped. In orbit, Admiral Mason received the news. The weapon is disabled. The Emperor's ship is attempting to escape the system. Cut off his retreat, Mason ordered. All ships, close the net. Hours later, the fighting had largely ceased. Imperial forces, seeing their emperor flee and their capital fall, began surrendering across the planet. In the Imperial Palace's Grand Hall, representatives of the Alliance gathered. The Emperor had been captured trying to reach the outer systems. The Empire, which had stood for thousands of years, had fallen in just 6 months. Mason looked around at the diverse beings who had joined together to achieve the impossible. In the center of the hall, they placed a memorial to General Alan Wright, whose execution had united them all. "Remember what we stand for," read the inscription, echoing Wright's final words. And they had remembered, not just humans, but all free beings across the galaxy.